Okay.
Jorge is the founder of Fandango Fronterizo, which is the festival that takes place annually on both sides of the border between the United States and Mexico. In the Son Jarocho tradition, it's it's not really a festival; it's a community gathering of song and dance called a Fandango. And so this really all started with an idea that came to Jorge. So we have done this before, and we love to kind of take everybody on the journey that we experienced. And so if we could start with Jorge talking about his how this idea came to him, how it arrived to Arturo, how it went to Kabir, and then how it came to me. And once it arrives at me, I would be happy to keep going with it. So, but first we have to find Jorge. Is there a way of making
Leah or Bill, could you add Jorge to the panelists?
While we do that, why don't we do it a little bit differently? Arturo, why don't we start with you when you read the article, and then we'll boomerang it back to Jorge.
I have an organization, a nonprofit called the Afro Latin Jazz Alliance, which is an education, preservation, and a performing organization. And I have a board member who sent me this article from the New York Times, maybe 6-7 years ago. And the article was about a man named Jorge Francisco Castillo, who was doing this incredible trickery, this mischief, this incredible magic that he does. He was bringing people from both sides of the United States and Mexico, meeting at the border in Tijuana and celebrating unity at the very wall that separates us. He was taking people and using the very elements of separation and oppression, using razor wire and patrol dogs and border guards and gathering across the fence. And it's really mind-blowing. If you've seen the film, you saw the Villalobos brothers playing across the fence to each other and other musicians. And so I thought this was the most incredibly elegant act of artivism that I'd ever heard of. And I've had the privilege of working very closely with Kabir Sehgal for many, many recordings. I think we've done 7 together. And we were in Las Vegas, and I said to Kabir, I said, this is, because Kabir has been very generous with me, and a lot of my records are socially and politically controversial. And I said to Kabir, I said, this is a perfect recording. This is a perfect project. We can go to Mexico. We can join up with Jorge and his musicians, the incredible Son Jarocho musicians. And not only can we work with them and play alongside them at the wall, we can maybe do a recording, bring them to New York, do a symphony space concert, and then from there it really took a lot of different forms. So I'm going to hand the baton to Kabir.
Kabir, I'm going to steal the baton from you.
You have it. Take it.
Jorge, I guess I was hallucinating. I thought I saw that he joined. So I will speak for Jorge, and then we'll go back to Kabir. Well, Jorge was a librarian in San Diego, but he was also a musician. And he doesn't really speak about this much, but he had been studying classical Spanish guitar for many years. And that was his original aspiration, really, was to pursue music. He also loved books and literature and so forth, and the librarian, fit for him, and he kept doing music. And then during a time in his life where there was a bit of turmoil and things were shifting in his life, he was invited to a Fandango in San Diego. And he had never been to one, and he'd never heard of Son Jarocho music. And amazingly, at that Fandango, the person leading the Fandango was Patricio Hidalgo, who you see in our film, who's quite a prominent Son Jarocho artist and musician, and comes from a long line of Son Jarocho tradition. And so Jorge, he could see Jorge kind of getting swept away by the Fandango. And he actually approached him with a book about Son Jarocho and said to Jorge, well, Jorge said, I love this, and this is so incredible. He said, well, if you want to learn more, read this book. And Jorge got pulled into it. And within a couple of years after that, he moved to Tijuana, and he had continued to get more and more immersed in son jarocho music. He had gone to Veracruz to learn about the masters. And one day he was invited to be part of a beach cleaning by another organization that was dedicated to, that was like a nonprofit that was quite committed to creating a warmer relationship between the United States and Mexico at that border. And so they had multiple events, like they have gardens on both sides, and they have gardening done on both sides. And they also, and this particular event was a beach cleaning that took place simultaneously on both sides of the border. And so they had people cleaning the beach in San Diego and people cleaning the beach in Tijuana. And this was Jorge's first time at this location, which is the location you see in the film. And at that time, which I think was around 2007, there was not as much netting at the border. Through the years, it's so silly, but through the years, the United States have been putting more and more layers of netting on that side of the border. But at that time, there was enough of a gap that when he was close to the actual barrier and cleaning there, a little boy from the San Diego side came running over and handed him a bottle of water through the barrier, which if you think about it, it's literally someone from the United States handing a bottle of water over to someone in Mexico. It's quite a profound moment, and I think it hit Jorge in that way. And at that point, he had already been thinking and wanting to do some kind of a fandango that combined people from Mexico, from Tijuana and San Diego. But because of all the restrictions and the difficulties of doing that, he hadn't been able to do it. So in that moment, when he picked up that bottle of water, the idea came to him, why don't we do a fandango at the border, and we can have the San Diego people on the San Diego side, we can have the Tijuana people or the Mexican people on that side, and they can still do it together. And so that's how the idea came about.
Varda, I'm going to jump in really quickly because we missed a step here, and I want to apologize to my colleague Alejandro Madrid, who we had asked to moderate this discussion, and then we just skipped over that step. So I want to apologize to Alejandro, invite him to join us, and Alejandro, I know that you also have some thoughts about son jarocho, as well as a whole lot of questions for people to help us keep organized and on track. So let me just throw it over to you, Alejandro.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Anindita. Thanks, Varda, for this introduction to how the project came about and Jorge working at the border. And one of the really interesting things that you mentioned there is the fact that this border was not there really 30 years ago, right? This is something that's really quite recent, but in the American imagination has come to be somehow naturalized. I mean, we think about the border and all recent political speech about the border that's generated a lot of violence and hate, but also makes people try to people tend to believe that this is something that's been there, forever. But this is something that's really happened in the last 30 years or so. So I was really wondering about your experience, Arturo, being there with the orchestra playing at that border. But also I was wondering about whether we have attendees who might not be very familiar with what son jarocho is about, and I just wanna say something really quick about what son jarocho is and what Fandango is, which is really central to both your film and the experience that Jorge did in creating this sort of binational encounter there. So just quickly, I wanted to say that son jarocho is a Mexican tradition that comes from the state of Veracruz, which is in the Gulf of Mexico. It's that area of Mexico, one of the areas that had a lot of a very strong influence of African culture and African heritage. And this music comes from Mexico, comes to Mexico from Spain at the beginning of the conquest in the 16th century. And it really is a melting pot of traditions. Spanish music with African music with indigenous traditions that melt and coalesce, creating this type of music. It's a long-standing tradition that at some point was almost dying, actually, in the 1950s or so, And due to political reasons in Mexico, it was brought to a new life in the 1950s. And then in the 1970s, really what is very interesting here is that it became a part of the Mexican American imagination, how Mexican Americans in the United States are starting to identify themselves as Americans, but also as Mexicans, and they use son jarocho and these sort of pilgrimages to Veracruz, which is the land where these musicians who are in the film are from, and where this music comes from. And this revival of son jarocho that's so strong today in Mexico and in the United States is really a transnational dialogue that speaks about crossing these borders that the film is really talking about. How is it that music is able to move beyond the boundaries of the nation state, transcend these borders, and bypass the immigration laws as a sort of expressive culture that is welcome and accepted and embraced by people on both sides of the border. So I think that's something that's very important to keep in mind, no? That people in both Mexico and in the United States take this as a safe space, no? Music that allows them to stay away from violence, from crime, from some of the things that afflict their communities. And to survive, no? And this issue of survival is so emotionally strong in the film, no? When you have these musicians speaking about their experience with violence in Mexico and having to come to the United States to move away from that. So I wonder if maybe you want to talk a little bit about that question of borders, Varda, and your experience with border. I know you are the daughter of a Romanian and a South African who was raised in London and came to the United States, and you're crossing these borders all over. Maybe that's something that was inspiring to tackle a project about borders too.
Oh yes, 100%. Looks like Jorge has found us. Welcome, Jorge.
Hello. Good morning.
Well, first let me say one thing that you were talking about in regards to being a safe place and a place to survive in terms of the music and son jarocho and fandangos. It's actually even more than that. It is a place to claim the right to joy. It is a place to claim the right to happiness, not just to survive, but to thrive, you know, and joy and happiness is such essential human experiences that without them, you know, we can't survive. So just wanted to point that out. Yes, that is what really drew me to the project. And I think if I really think about it, all the films that I have been drawn to, they definitely, and I think this is true of all artists and everything they do, there's something that you're working out within yourself. You know, there's something either that you feel, you experience and see that you feel is worthy of expression, or it's something that hurts you, or you somehow have felt the impact of, and you want to create some kind of shift through your work. I mean, even if it's only in someone seeing it and perceiving something. So yes, for me, having been, you know, born in England, grew up in Israel, where my family had to flee because of war, went back to England, came to the United States, lived in many, I can't even count the number of schools that I attended growing up, and, you know, had multiple issues, put it that way. And so for me, you know, I celebrate diversity. I celebrate difference. Art is a safe place for me, for sure. So you're right about that, and something I relate to. And also just very specifically, I just, you know, during the time, and I mean, it continues. It's a myth to think that it actually happened during the Trump administration, that there were issues to do with, you know, it became inflamed, but it was an issue that already existed between, you know, that has not correctly or in the humanitarian way addressed migration and the refugee crisis and how we relate to other countries and people coming here to seek refuge, and how to be with that and how to manage that. And during the previous administration, you know, did get very inflamed, and we got to see up close, you know, families being separated and people being vilified because they were different. And I think that's still something we can't pretend that we're not still grappling with. So when I heard about this project, which was actually on a Facebook post in a women's directors group, it just said a friend of mine is looking for someone to film a festival at the border between the United States and Mexico. It was so aligned with what I was already visioning that I wanted to do that I jumped on it.
Thanks, Varda. I have a question for Jorge, and sort of going back to this idea of the music and the experience as a safe place that, as Varda says, also empowers people and allows them to be to have this joy, that sometimes their everyday life sort of keeps them away from. I was wondering about your experience. You also have said something about how is it that you became involved with Son Jarocho and how it was also a safe space for you personally. So I would like maybe if you can tell us a little bit about that, and also about the very idea of the Fandango Fronterizo, this event that is binational, and how were you able to mobilize people, to participate both from Mexico and from the United States. And the United States, there's really people from all over the country that go there and play at that event, no? I think you're muted, Jorge.
Thank you, thank you, Alejandro. Nice meeting you. Great pleasure to be here. Well, yeah, the like Varda was saying, the emotional part of the Fandango is so powerful that when I first had my first experience with the Fandango was totally like that. I was saying in the documentary, I was coming from a difficult time in my life where first I had lost a brother. One of my oldest brother had passed a few months before, and then I had a divorce. So I was kind of like going through a crisis, and then I felt like the Fandango welcomed me and hugged me so beautifully that I never want to leave it again. So uh, this fandangos are like that, where everybody's welcome. It's a celebration. And I'm a musician too, so that was a perfect perfect remedy for me. And so I was very very blessed with that, and ever since I've been part of the fandango, and so then the the fandango. The other part of the question was how this happened, right? How the fandangos came to the border. Uh, well, the border is very active in both. I mean, I was born in El Paso, Texas, and raised in Juarez, so I was always involved with the border. And then I came to California, to San Diego and Tijuana, so I was again very involved with the border. So we always have these feelings of the dual situation, where you have two languages, two coins, two laws, everything's double, you always have to experience that. And well, when I experienced Son Jarocho and we start having fandangos, we couldn't get together in a fandango with our brothers from Mexico or our brothers from the US. So it was difficult to get together in one place because of the documents and the visas and all those situations that happen at the border. So it was not a perfect place to have a fandango. And one time I was invited to a beach cleaning day at the playas de Tijuana and the Mexican side. So, where the fences, and you can probably see it on the film, you see the fence and the water crashes the fence on both sides of the border. And I was right there in that spot cleaning the beach, and all of a sudden we got closer and closer to the fence, and I saw these families on the other side of the fence, and the bars that divide the countries are probably about 8 inches apart. So there's not enough room for a body to cross, but a hand can cross, easily. So I started shaking hands with families on the other side, and it was beautiful. So I immediately thought about the place to have a fandango finally came to me and said, "This is the perfect place to have a fandango." So I think all of us that were in the fandangos, if we, I was just how to say, it was so coincidental, that I was there. I was chosen to be there because I'm pretty sure that if all my friends that play fandangos would have been there, they probably wouldn't talk the same thing. Oh, this is the place. I just, when I saw it, I believed so much in that, and I said, let's do this, and I started, talking to people and moving things to make it happen, and that's part of my personality. I like to push things like that and then make them happen, and that's when I met Arturo and Kabir. I saw the same thing. I said, these people are just the same way. They just make things happen. So that was a perfect connection, and then that's how it started.
Arturo, I have a question for you. Talking about the space, where the fandango takes place, and you bringing your orchestra and your musicians to play right there at that park, the Friendship Park, as it was called, that was crossed when the border was placed there in 1993, no? But people used to just freely go from one side to the other, from Mexico to the United States, or from the United States to Mexico, and then that it was divided. And now it's a very striking image. You go there and you have this park that is divided and somehow not well kept on one side. So I was wondering about your experience as a musician, with your musicians being there playing at that particular place. How did you feel? No, you have Mexican heritage. You speak about that in the film. But you were raised in New York, also with another background and another sort of Afro-American tradition that sort of joins in this particular place, with the Afro-Mexican tradition of the son jarocho. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
A long time ago, I decided that I wasn't going to identify as one thing or another, as either a jazz musician or a folkloric musician. I don't believe in those delineations. And if you look at son jarocho music, imagine a kente cloth of brilliant hues made of the feathers of incandescent tropical birds, reflecting the glorious people of Africa, reflecting the glorious people of Mexico, the indigenous people, reflecting all that is good about European society and even farther back. And so to me, the thing that I've done my whole life is try to discover this migrant force that has given me breath, that has given me wings, this migrant force called music, which you have so very aptly pointed out is a gift from Africa, a gift from Europe, a gift that comes to the New World. It comes to Mexico, it comes to Venezuela, it comes to Cuba, it comes to New Orleans. And so I have never, ever practiced. I'm not a jazz musician. I'm not a Latin musician. I'm a musician. I love the thing that drives me, the thing that compels me, the thing that makes me get up every single day of my life is this idea that we're building something that's much bigger than one component. And in a way, son jarocho music is the perfect example of that because it is quintessentially Mexican. It is called Afro-Mexican music. It's music from specifically Veracruz, but it's comprised of jaranas, layers of striated rhythms that come from Africa. It's played on instruments that are directly related to the vihuela, that are directly related to the oud. And so this music, this thing that happens that comes from all over the planet and concentrates in Veracruz, and then it's taken up by the people of Veracruz with incredible amounts of indigenous blood. I mean, it's an amazing population. And so you look and you see these people who are clearly from there, pick up this global force, and in their hands it becomes essentially Veracruz. So in other words, this music of son jarocho teaches me that you don't dilute by embracing your global sources of information and culture and nutrition. And so when I take my musicians down to the border, when they meet Jorge, first of all, you can't meet Jorge without falling madly in love with him. He's the greatest human being ever. He's the warmest person you could possibly imagine. Jorge, I'm talking about you, man. That guy is so full of love, and he gives it so freely. You can't talk to Jorge without knowing that he's a huge-hearted person. So my musicians walk into this life. They meet the other incredibly warm-hearted people. And I've got the Afro Latin Jazz Orchestra, 18 musicians. I've got MacArthur Fellow Regina Carter. I've got the great drummer-composer Antonio Sanchez, the Villalobos brothers, Rahim Alhaj, Saba Motalevi, and nobody knows what's going on. They're all going, whoa, what are we doing here? What's going on? And all of a sudden they meet Jorge and the musicians, they meet Varda, and all of a sudden we understand that we're here to affirm ourselves and not dilute ourselves by embracing one another. And it is literally the most beautiful thing that you can do with music. And so from the very minute that we set foot in Tijuana, it felt like home. It felt like home, like in such a powerful way. And I'll tell you one quick story about this is a story I very rarely tell, but this is the power of music. This is the power of culture. This is the power of strength. We were rehearsing in a courtyard. And we got done with the day, and we're all headed back to our vans. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a famous dancing horse, the famous dancing horses of Mexico. So I motioned the trainer to bring the horse over, brings the horse over, and starts to dance. And before you know it, musicians are pulling out their saxophones, their guitars, their violins, just clapping and singing. We were having an interspecies jam session. And I mean, that is why I don't feel that it was we were there. We were meant to be there. We were meant to be with Jorge and Ramon and Fernando. We were meant to do that. And it felt as natural as anything I've ever done in my life.
Great. Thank you, Arturo. I have a question for Kabir before going back to Varda. Kabir, I think I think it's very difficult to sort of tackle going into a foreign community and sort of trying to understand their essence. No, it's very difficult to get that, and I wonder how is it that you were able to do it, no, with the film in without romanticizing. No, it's very easy to romanticize the experience of someone who's foreign to us or a culture that's foreign to us. So how were you able to engage these different communities in Mexico without romanticizing that history of violence that is really behind their practice, no, and their everyday life experience? Great.
Yeah, it's a good question, Alejandro. I suppose as a producer, you kind of have to find great people for a project and let them do what they do well, and that's what we did here. Obviously, when we were looking for a director, we wanted someone who was very talented and also a graduate of Cornell. So we found Varda, and it was a very odd filter, but that was our filter, and we kind of trusted her because I had not made a film before. Arturo has been part of many films and scoring and composing, but we also knew that we wanted this to be a cross-cultural collaboration. And so when Varda and I were talking about just what you're asking about, how do we make sure there's an authenticity here, not just in front of the camera, which I think, Jorge brought by introducing us to the real masters of Jarocho. But we made a decision to do the post-production in Mexico City to make sure that, even behind the camera, there was a true collaboration, so we could learn and understand, what works and what doesn't. And there was a significant and healthy push and pull of what to include and what not to include, coming down to how the subtitles should look and how they should read, to comments that Arturo, Jorge, and I made while in the car that may be taken one way or the other. So there was a very healthy back and forth. And in fact, I found it interesting. Some of the folks we were working with in Mexico City, Dinamita Post, they were new to Jarocho music. They didn't know about Jarocho music, and that's not unusual. Like, I'm here in Atlanta, I don't know that much about Gullah music, but it's just right here in the Carolina coast, right? So it was just trusting Varda and trusting a production crew not to romanticize, and also note that in Hollywood and movies there is a glamorization of narco trafficking and violence, and this film is not that. In fact, I've shared this film with many friends I've served with in the military, and they say, I didn't realize this was Mexico. I thought it was all caravans, and I didn't realize there was a Mexican middle class. I didn't realize there's someone named Tacho. How do I get a guitar? That kind of thing. And that's a victory. Again, I don't I like to say I don't think we're changing how people vote, but I think we're sort of putting a little face on who are sort of, I don't know, typical, just really, really wonderful people in Mexico.
Great. Yeah, I really like that idea of putting a voice and putting a face to this sort of faceless imaginary Mexican that sort of crosses the political landscape in the United States. And Varda, you being behind the cameras and deciding a lot of what is it going to be shot and how you're gonna tell the story. I wonder if you can tell us about that. The people that you're interviewing in Mexico, the musicians, and also I'm very interested about those particular moments when they get very emotional. And at some point you see them at the verge of crying, telling their stories and very deep emotional engagement with their land and with their families. That may not be something that when people hear the word Mexican, they think about. Can you tell us more about that and your decision making in doing the film?
Yes. Well, I attribute that to them. I think that is a reflection of their mastery, their understanding of storytelling, their authentic, their security, I guess you could say, of themselves, that they could reveal themselves in that way. And I think that there was also a trust. And, filmmakers, I've heard, other documentary filmmakers talk about, they might spend a year visiting people, getting to know them before filming, getting to know them to kind of create that level of trust and to be able to have access to that kind of openness. But in this case, first of all, we didn't have that time. I only knew that we were going to be filming about 3 weeks prior to the Fandango Fronterizo. But also, they were so open. I think a lot of it has to do with Jorge. They have very close relationships with Jorge. They trust Jorge. Jorge is the one who made the introduction. And I'm sure he said, to them, this is a good project, and, when we met, I also trusted them. They could see we came to Veracruz knowing nothing, not knowing anyone. And, we brought our crew and we were committed. So I think that there was a mirroring going on, that they could see that, I was sincere and come from a place of love and really wanted to make a film about them and their story. And that they were so welcoming and loving and open. And I was immediately felt like they were part of my family. Very quickly. I felt like, wow, I wish we lived closer so we could spend more time together, because we are of the same cloth. They're artists just like I am. They care about aesthetics. They care about the world. They're so articulate, way more than I am. And so thoughtful. And, and I think that they sensed that, that we had this shared common way of being in the world. And so they trusted, that I would take care of them and present their story in a way that reflected how they wanted it to be. It was a collaboration. It wasn't like I came in there and said, you do this, you do that, and had this idea in my mind as to what they should say or what it would be like. I had nothing. It was blank. I had no idea. And I was very open to them and wanting them to have agency in their own storytelling and how they want it to be, So I think that has a lot to do with it.
Thank you. I have a question that I guess is a question for everyone. You feel free to jump in and answer it any way you want. But I'm thinking about sort of the final part of the documentary. I mean the film, and the concert in New York City, where you have the Afro Latin Jazz Alliance and the musicians from Mexico, but also musicians from other parts of the world that are joining. musicians, son jarocho musicians from New York City, some people I could actually recognize because we organized a Fandango encounter at Cornell actually in 2015, and we invited many of these folks that sort of may appear in the film at different moments. So I wonder about that, you know, and what was like organizing that concert, filming that concert, putting all of those musicians from different places together and playing this music that was something new based on old music, no sort of a new reinvention or a new look at these older traditions, no?
I'm going to take that one for a second, just because I don't think we've ever told the story. We've had 25-year residency at one of New York's most famous jazz nightclubs, Birdland. And when Jorge came to do the appearance, he sat in with us. So we actually brought Son Jarocho into Birdland. So I mean, I remember that because they were jamming in the dressing room area, and they came out on stage, and it was the first time, and it was really funny because, as you know, most of the kitchen staff is Mexican. So all of a sudden they're in the kitchen, they hear Son Jarocho music, and they come out. They come out in droves. They cannot believe what they're hearing. The experience in New York was extraordinary for me because I again, having these musicians be on stage at Symphony Space and interacting with Julia de Palacio and all the other musicians that are from the Bronx that are great Son Jarocho devotees. It just felt really natural. It felt really, and of course, I didn't. Again, you know, it's you have to be very careful not to overly arrange the horns because I think that the texture of the jaranas has to be predominant, and I think that also the thing that we found difficult was that the particular improvisatory nature of Son Jarocho insist that somebody could deviate from a 16 or a 32 or a 24 measure structure. So there are a lot of times where we just have to listen carefully, and it makes for a really incredibly intimate experience when you have to be aware of where the music is going before you bring the horns in. So I thought it was really important for us to really respect greatly the true nature of Son Jarocho music. Otherwise, it would never have worked. And I think that was what I walked away with, was knowing that all of us have to be nimble and flexible and respectful of one another. And I think that's the only way that music works. And we certainly had a great time. And when Fernando breaks out in his poem on stage at Symphony Space, that's one of the most powerful. I mean, it was all I could do to keep from crying on stage, and I could see that other people were feeling that same emotion.
Can I ask a quick question of Arturo? Arturo, can I ask, because I know you guys rehearsed a little bit, but not much. And so I'm wondering, was there actually improvisation going on while the performance was happening, where you were bringing in the horns at certain times, or was it based on, the way that it was rehearsed? So I'm just curious, because what you were saying, it sounds like things were happening on the fly.
Well, yeah, to some degree. For instance, I think it was Cascabel that, I would literally sense, or maybe with Sikisiri, I would immediately sense that it was going to the refrain. And then sometimes it would actually open up more, and there would be more improvisatory stuff. So I was looking at Jorge, and I was looking at Patricio, and I was going, now. Then, depending on the signals they gave me, I would bring in the horns or the tenor saxophone solo. But it had to be like that. And you know what? That's the best thing about this music. I mean, I'm a classically trained pianist. That's why, that's my degrees. But you can't put those kinds of constraints on this kind of music. You have to literally be intentional. That's the thing that I love about doing this. I love about doing this music with Jorge and the musicians of Son Jarocho. You have to be intentional. You have to be there. You can't phone it in because it just happens instantaneously. And that was the experience. I had to kind of be improvisational.
May I ask a follow-up question as a non-expert? But what two things actually that Arturo at various points mentioned in today's meeting, and that I think might bridge the conversation successfully to our group of young people who are Debbie and my students who are in the audience, and I'm sure would also like to dialogue with you today. One is this last thing that you said about intention. And so there is, there is this idea of intention without attachment. That's a tenet of Buddhism, actually, that I kept feeling while I was looking at this dynamic. And it's so interesting because, of course, that's a musical principle. But I wanted to go back to a previous comment that you made, because the seminar from which bulk of the audience today come, which is our students in a seminar called Border Environments. And the moment, Arturo, when you mentioned the multi-species dance, right, as well as the cultural, and a kind of an creative view of culture as additions are good. It's not dilution, right, if I'm quoting you correctly over here, and an accretion of time at the border, as well as traditions or material cultures, animals, humans, right? All of these things constitute some of the assemblages through which we have been pushing our students to think about the border beyond just human categories that are artificially put there and used for partitioning various, human and non-human elements at the border. And one of the things that I did want to, bring in as an environmental humanist, this is a very specific seminar-specific point of view, perhaps, for which I would love to open it up to the young folks here, is air, right? Because the sonic environment that forms yet another bridge. And could I ask you, this may sound very technical, but I am curious, how did you deal with sound, wave, breeze, filming in that environment? Could
It's funny. It's funny because one of the discussions that I had repeatedly with Kabir was this idea of so many walls needed to come down, so many walls, environmental walls. A good example of that is that how do we record sound? How do why is something recorded in 48 track digital splendor better than something recorded on a cassette tape? It's not. And in fact, those distinctions, I think, are cultural constructs. And so we had wonderful sound people, incredible cinematographer. I mean, the thing was that I felt like we really had to deal with very different, very varying acoustic settings. And I think that, to me, that's also a wall that needs to come down. That this is that music needs to be pristine, and it can't have mistakes, and it can't have interruptions. It can't have dogs howling in the background. That's a bunch of crock. It really is. Music is best experienced in community with people. If you go to India, you see people clapping along with the talas and singing. And sometimes in Indonesia, they can spend 2 days at a concert, at a shadow puppet theater, and kids are coming, going, dogs are barking, people are eating, sometimes they're talking. And this is what music is about. It really is. Music is about that the environment does not determine the investment. And that's what I mean by intentionality. The environment does not determine. The intention is there. You're there because you want to make music. And now some people are there because they like the money. Some people are there because they like the fame. Some people are there because they like the blah, blah, blah. Art is a service to humanity. It's what we do to connect ourselves with each other. And that can't just happen in a pristine concert hall with acoustically perfect tiles, And so it's funny you say that, because we had very long discussions, Kabir and I, about the different walls, the cultural constructs, the acoustic constructs that we had to intentionally challenge in the making of the film, in the making of the recording, and in the discussion thereafter.
And if yeah, I just wanted to add also a couple of things. I think it's a very astute remark. First of all, in regards to the filming, Jorge had said, one of the things that I read early on when I was doing my research about this project was something I believe that Jorge had said. And what he had said is, like the wind, like the birds, music knows no bounds. And so from the filming perspective, to capture that, I had used, these very high angles using a drone, actually, that was like the bird and like the wind. And I think that you see when you go way up high and we're looking down, we can see there is no separation. And so that was a visual way of conveying that. And we are in the air, and it is all just about the air. And in the air, we're all interconnected. I mean, we know, you start getting to physics, that wall is porous. It's not even solid. So the other thing I just want to mention, that just to add on to something that Arturo was saying, and that is that, I think capitalism and the commercialization of music has, one of the disservices it has done is to create the separation and this sort of elitism of what music is. And it's taken music away from the people, and it's made it seem as though only some people can be musicians. Folk music was all about creating community and coming together. And, so I think that what I would, hope is that through the work that Arturo is doing, and being such an important influencer in this realm, that he will maybe help, and maybe the film and maybe the Fandangos, will return this very rich way of being, to the people. And it doesn't always have to be about making money. It can just be about the fun and the joy of coming together to create art or whatever it is, and we need that. We need that sense of community and that interconnectedness. And I think that that's what the Fandango shows us.
Jorge, people want to know if there's going to be a Fandango this summer at the wall.
We are still waiting. The border's still closed. And especially the park area where we have the Fandango in the American side is still closed, and we don't know. They're talking about the middle of June when they'll open if everything's good. But I'm thinking that it's probably safer because in Mexico the vaccination is still way behind. They're still working on people 60 and older. And they probably finish or be done with people 30 and older by the middle of the fall. So we're thinking that to make it safe for everybody, we would like to do it in probably September or October.
Thanks, Jorge. We also have a question from a colleague who is not at Cornell and so was not able to participate in the showing that you all facilitated for us here. So perhaps either Kabir or Varda, one of you could let my colleague Robert Neustadt know about how people at other universities can find out about how to view this film and make it available for their folks.
Kabir, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to answer?
Go for it.
Well, you're welcome to connect them with me, and we'll figure it out. Yeah, so you're welcome to make the connection. I'm so delighted that they want to do that and they want to share it, and we will figure out a way to make it happen.
Also, it's available on HBO Max too. People should know that you can see it on HBO Max.
That's true.
Wonderful. Yeah. I was going to ask that where can the general public get to it?
Oh yes.
This
and we have a Facebook page. We also have a Facebook page. it's Facebook/Fandango at the Wall. So any inquiries can be sent through our Facebook page as well. And also just to catch up on what's going on and additional screenings and conversations and stuff.
If I can, is when Arturo was talking about the concert in New York and how how the musicians in New York interact with the son jarocho musicians and but not only that, that was very friendly, that was very welcoming, it was so beautiful, but musically, like Arturo was saying, the way the horns and the instrumentation came, it was so organic all the time that I think there was a beautiful sensitivity from everybody that Arturo had the experience as a musician, but especially like Siki Siri. Every time I hear Siki Siri, it's kind of like the welcoming song jarocho that we play to start every single fandango, and when we start ourselves with the son jarocho, and then kind of like I don't know, maybe 8-12 bars later, the orchestra comes in. Oh, I never told Arturo this, but that's exactly the same feeling. My whole body shakes when I'm hearing that orchestra coming, and I feel exactly the same way when I feel at the border. When we start hearing the fandango in the morning at the border, and you start hearing the musicians on the other side responding to you and singing together, oh man, it's an amazing feeling, and I felt the same way when the orchestra came, because it comes so beautiful, and it makes me it makes me cry, and it's hard to play and cry at the same time and at the moment, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Kabir, you also played. That's an unusual role for a producer, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I played a little bit. I was just trying to learn from everyone. That's a great thing about jarocho music. Anyone can kind of join in, and Deborah, I hope you'll join in when we do the Fandango in Ithaca.
Yeah, let's bring in everybody. There's a question: should we bring in the attendees? I think that's wonderful, because the other thing I just wanted to share that we can learn from Arturo and Jorge and Kabir is that we don't need to wait for anybody to get permission to, or to make it even possible to take some kind of action. In this case, it's a creative endeavor to create the shift that we want to see in the world. We don't need permission to do that. We have agency. We can do it in the smallest of ways. And you were talking about intention and letting go. Very much so. You can set an intention, and you kind of go forward and create whatever that is that you want to do. And maybe when you let go, all that does is open possibilities, because now you're not limited with how you think it should happen, and things open up. But so I just want to, invite, everyone who's listening here and engaged in one of the most important conversations that we can be having right now globally, and how to deal with the borders and migration and refugee and outside of the environment crisis, which is impacting this. So I think this is a very important subject matter, and I'm just so grateful to see it being given this much attention at this level. And just want to encourage the students to know that you have agency of power to create the change that you want to see. I know it sounds cliche, but it's true.
Thank you so much. That indeed is the kind of message as well that we all need to hear at this point. And I wanted to ask a follow-up question